Welcome to Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today we have a special guest. His name is Buddy. Also goes by Isaac. His nickname is Buddy. He has a 2003 Sequoia. We are going to perform a rear axle seal and bearing job on his Sequoia. Sequoia axles are kind of a hybrid between a third generation 4Runner axle and a fifth generation 4Runner axle. They have common attributes from both axle setups. So even though we've done quite a few rear axle seal bearing jobs, we've documented quite a few, I wanted to document this one for Sequoia owners so they can see how to properly do this job, because there are some differences and we are going to note those differences in this video. So we're going to get out to the truck, we're going to jack up the rear end, and we're going to get started with this job. I can't believe I almost forgot, but I need to introduce the tool set that we are going to use to perform this job. It comes from my buddy Dwayne, who makes them out of his home in Omaha, Nebraska, made in the USA. And this is everything. You got the main tool, you have a couple different adapter plates, you have a press plate, you have this washer and this thing that are all going to be used in this video. In my opinion, there is no better tool to do axle work than Dwayne's tools that he sells via eBay, or you can buy them directly from him. I'll provide his email address and you can contact him, and he can save you a little bit of money by buying directly from him instead of going through eBay. So I highly recommend that you don't buy the cheaper Chinese rip-off copies. Buy from Dwayne, made in the USA, and you know that you're not going to have any problem with the tool. Some people that went the cheaper route and tried to go with the Chinese route regretted it because the tool wasn't made right and it didn't fit on the axle properly. So don't make that mistake. Let's get out to the rig and get started with the job. We have the rear end jacked up on one side, the side we're going to be working on, which is the driver's side. Buddy already did the rear axle bearing and seal job on the passenger side. So that's why we didn't jack up and support the rear axle with two jack stands to keep it level, then have to drain the gear oil because we don't want gear oil spilling out when we pull the axles out. Because we have one side jacked up, we don't have to drain the differential oil because it's new from the job he did on the passenger side. So we're just gonna have one side jacked up just like that. And then we have some wheel chocks in the front to help keep the vehicle from rolling down my driveway, which would be a bad thing. So for this job, I'm gonna let Buddy do a lot of the wrenching because I have an injured toe. I fractured a toe by a freak accident before my Death Valley trip. I'm gonna let Buddy do a lot of the wrenching. So he's gonna take the wheel off using my DeWalt impact gun. And you can see that he's done some work already. He's replaced the rotor and the pads. So he's obviously not gonna be due for a brake job for a while. So next we're gonna get the brake caliper disconnected. And from experience, when we did a rear axle bearing and seal job on my buddy Carlos's 5th gen 4Runner, we had to break free the brake line from the backing plate here so we can remove the axle, because without doing that, the brake line and the brake caliper has to come with it. And so what we want to do is we're going to disconnect the brake line here. And then once that's disconnected, we're going to cap it with a 7/32 vacuum cap to limit the loss of fluid. And then we're going to get a little pry bar and knock up this retaining clip to where we could then free the female side of the brake line from the brake backing plate. And then we're going to get our socket and ratchet out, and we're going to take off this brake caliper. So Buddy's going to use a 10mm flare nut wrench to break that brake line connection.
And it's sticky.
Super tight?
Oh yeah. There we go.
There we go, okay. Now that he's got it broken free with that, he's gonna switch to a open end 10mm if he can't spin it off with his hand.
No, it's too sticky. Rusty.
Too sticky? Okay.
And rusty.
And then we have some rags underneath it to capture some of the leaking brake fluid. Okay, he's got the line disconnected and he's gonna cap off the end with the vacuum cap. Oh, you can't slide it back because there's a bend.
It's bent. Yeah.
There's a bend. We have to get a bigger vacuum cap then. So normally with these brake lines, is you could slide back the fitting on the brake line and you could slip over a 7/32 vacuum cap over just the tubing, the flared end of the tubing. But because this bend right here, somebody tweaked this, probably a former mechanic or a previous owner, we can't slide the fitting back far enough to just expose the flared tubing end. So we had to go with a bigger vacuum cap to slide over the whole thing to stop the flow of fluid. And it looks like it's stopped. So now we're gonna knock this clip free. So Buddy's utilizing a small pry bar and a ball peen hammer. He's gonna knock that clip up and free it. There it is. Now Buddy can pull that brake line free of the bracket. And because we want to limit the loss of brake fluid in the system, we're going to grab a silicone plug and we're going to plug that off so a bunch of brake fluid doesn't pour out of the caliper.
There. That's nice and tight.
Okay, we got it plugged off. The bolts that hold the caliper to the brake bracket that houses the brake pads, they're 17 millimeter. They're actually a pin. There's a pin that goes through here. Since Buddy had this caliper off recently, they're not going to be that tight, but you might find that they're really tight and you might have to get onto here with your 17 millimeter socket and a long breaker bar, like a 2-footer, to break them free. But since he's had it off recently, he should just be able to get on here with a 1/2-inch ratchet and a socket and break them free. Okay, they're both loose. I bet you he should be able to spin them out with his hand now. No. You're in there.
This one.
That one, the top one.
All right, so that pin now is free. Still feels tight.
Not a good sign.
No, it's not.
Okay, he's finally got that bottom pin loose and he's going to remove them and then slide the caliper off. And then the brake line is going to come with it because we disconnected it.
Here.
Now we're going to disconnect the brake bracket that houses the pads. There's two 17 millimeter bolts. He's going to use the same ratchet, same socket, and get that free.
Okay.
He's got both bolts out. He should be able to slide that off.
And right off.
Again, since Buddy was recently working on this, this rotor is not going to fight him coming off the face of the axle. But if you're doing this job and a brake job hasn't been done in a long time, you're most likely going to have to smack this pretty good with a plastic mallet to break the bond of the rotor with the axle face, and then you could slide it off. If you can't just do it with brute force by smacking it and breaking the rotor free of the axle flange face, there's a couple threaded holes on these rotors. They are an M8 by 1.25 pitch. And you screw one in on one side, and then you screw one in on the opposing side, and then you start drawing them in equally, and the end of the bolt is going to push up against the axle flange face as you screw them in, and it's going to draw it out. It's like just basically like using a puller. So that's another technique to get the rotor off if you're finding that it's just not coming free with some firm wax with a mallet or a dead blow hammer. And there we go. There also could be a situation where the parking brake might have been a little bit too tight, and that's going to fight you from getting the rotor off. So this parking brake system is kind of unique. You have rear disc brakes, but you have a drum parking brake that's part of the rotor. So you can see that the brake shoes for the parking brake right in here, and then your brake pads clamp on here to stop the vehicle. If these shoes are too tight, there is an adjuster down here. Right there, there's an adjuster wheel, and you'll see that there's two holes in the axle flange. One goes all the way through, the other one doesn't. This is the hole that directs oil that's getting past the axle seal through the bearing, and the oil deflector directs the oil outside the axle flange face and to the outside of the wheel. That's what that hole's for. So you can see that this is a through hole. So with both tires off the ground, you can turn the axle to where this hole is now aligned with the star adjuster down there. And then you just come in with a screwdriver or similar tool, and you have to turn the adjuster to back off the parking brake shoes to where you can slide the rotor off. This star adjuster was backed off all the way. It wasn't adjusted out at all. So if you go downward, turning it this way, that's tightening up the shoes. If you had to loosen it up, you'd come in with your screwdriver and you want to move the wheel up. So you have to turn it this way. And then if you look at this gap right here, you'll see it decrease, basically letting you know that the shoes are coming inboard and reducing tension on the rotor. There could be a situation where you get your two M8 bolts into the rotor and then you start trying to draw the rotor off. But because the shoes are so tight up against the inside of the rotor, as you draw that rotor off, you're going to start pulling the brake shoes with it. And then that's bad, because then you can start bending things and breaking the little components of your parking brake. So one of the things that you would first want to do is turn the axle to where the open hole faces that, get in with your screwdriver, loosen the star adjuster all the way to where the shoes are collapsed in fully towards the axle, and then try to get the rotor off. You just don't want to go crazy with those two bolts and then mess up your parking brake parts. So talking about all this just got me thinking, I need to utilize this hole in the axle to get access with my special tool to disconnect the shoe hold down spring assemblies. With one tire on the ground, I can't do that. So we are going to have to jack it up, get a jack stand on the passenger side of the axle so both rear wheels are off the ground, so then I could turn this to align the hole in the axle with the hold down spring assemblies so I could get in there with my tool. So I'm going to get my jack out and another jack stand, and we're going to jack up that driver side. Okay. So now with the other wheel off the ground, now you can see I could turn this and align the hole with the hold down spring assemblies, and I'm going to work on getting the brake parts off, because we have to disassemble the parking brake in order to pull the axle out. The first things I'm going to remove are these return springs. From experience, I learned that a small, well-built needle nose vice grips is a good tool to use. These are made by Knipex. So I'm going to clamp onto this, maybe get a little bit tighter, and then draw it towards the rear of the vehicle and get it out. And I'm going to lay out these parts on the ground in the position I took them off. So I'm going to put this spring on the front. This one might be a little harder because the spring is a little bit harder to get to. Maybe I'll try to grab it here. There we go. This one's pretty tweaked. If we're going to reuse this one, I'm probably going to bend this in a little bit. Got those two. Now I'm going to work on disconnecting the front shoe. You see this tool, it's got two prongs here. I got my tool, I'm going to push in, and then on the back side, you can feel where the pin is coming through the brake backing plate. I'm going to hold pressure on the back of the pin and then push it in, rotate it 90 degrees, and then disconnect it. And when this is all taken apart, I'll show you how all these parts work together. I'm just going to pull the pin out of the back here. This is against the shoe. It hooks into a little hole. The pin comes in through the back side, and then the spring goes on, and then you have the outer plate, and it's slotted. So you slide it in, and then you rotate it 90 degrees, and then now it's locked in. So what I was doing is I was pushing it in against the spring, turning it to where the slot lines up with the pin, and then I'm able to pull it off. So that's what I was doing. With the brake shoe hold down spring assembly disconnected, I can now rotate this shoe out. So I'll just rotate it down, and then you're gonna see that you have the star adjuster here, and it goes right in between the two shoes. I'm just gonna let that hang on the spring right there for now. You can see the assembly. So this is what I was showing you. As you turned it down, it makes the shoes tighter, and as you turn it in, it makes them get looser, contract, and then this part pulls out. So it goes in this orientation with the pull out side facing the rear, and then the side that adjusts facing the front. Now there's a spring right here. It's another return spring that goes in between the two shoes, and you can see how it's hooked. It hooks in the same spot on either shoe. So I'm just gonna slide that out and free that shoe. And then I'm just gonna leave that spring connected to the rear shoe for right now. Now I'm gonna rotate the axle and get this one aligned with the brake hold down spring for the rear shoe. We're gonna do the same thing. So again, I'm getting my finger back here on the back of the pin. I'm pushing against it, pushing in, rotating 90 degrees. That one didn't work this time. Gotta use my light to see where I'm at. There it is. And you can see where this plate hooks into the shoe. It hooks in right into that hole right there. And then I should be able to rotate this shoe down, and you can see the parking brake lever right here. You can see that I have this spring that I have to remove from this shoe. To get the parking brake cable free of the parking brake lever, I'm just gonna pull on the end of this and then slide it out. It's basically, you just have to create that gap and it slides right out. So just by simply pulling back, I'm able to free it. It's as easy as that. Another piece of the parking brake is this right here. So this goes in between the shoes at the top, and it goes in this orientation with the longer side facing out, this little nub facing out. The spring goes on the front side and this slot goes on this side. So if you get the two shoes together, this is where it goes in. It slides in right here. It slides in right here. That's where that piece is going. Something that wasn't easy to see is that these springs on the upper end, the return springs, they hook in right here. So they hook in there for the yellow spring. For the rear shoes, same spot. It hooks in here. So the shorter part of the spring hooks in right there, and then it hooks over the pin right here. Finally, you'll notice that the rear pin has a curve to it. It's got a U built into it. You just have to remember that this pin goes on the rear side. It looks like it's a little tweaked to me, but maybe not. When this goes through, this thing is on there first, hooking into the brake shoe, and then you've got your spring, and then you've got the outer plate that locks the pin in. Now I'm gonna disconnect the parking brake from the brake backing plate. I'm gonna use my small gear wrench, 1/4 inch ratchet, and 10mm socket. Okay, now this should come out. So I'm gonna try to persuade this out. I'm using a brass drift so I don't really bend anything. There it is.
When in doubt, hammer it out.
And that sucker's free. We're now going to disconnect the ABS sensor. It's held onto the axle housing with a 10mm bolt. See if it'll just pull out. No, it's not going to come out easy. There's a little slot that you can get in between the sensor and the axle housing with a flat blade screwdriver. It's pointing towards the top, and I'm going to do that right now. So I just fit it in there and then twist, and I can get the sensor out. And you could see all kinds of like grunge in there. I don't know if that's rust or gear oil got past, but these Sequoias have a TSB out for them where water intrusion has caused rusting in there, and we might end up having a fight getting this axle out because of it. So we'll put a prayer into the wrenching gods and hope that we don't really have to fight this, but this thing might be really rusted in there because water was able to get in there. The nuts that hold the axle to the axle housing are 17mm. I'm gonna use my long 17mm box end wrench to break them free. They're all broken free. Now I'm gonna switch to the ratcheting side and get them off the rest of the way. And you don't need to see this. It's gonna be too repetitive. So I'm gonna get all these off. So we're gonna give this the old college try. Buddy's gonna see if he can pull the axle out. Nope. Nothing. Not coming. So we're gonna have to do something else. We'll figure it out. So I have a slide hammer puller set from OTC. It's got a couple different adapter plates to hook up to an axle. This one's working okay. We can get 2 of the studs through it, but there's really not much thread exposed past this because of the way the flange face is made with this protrusion. I'm hoping that the force necessary to pull the axle out isn't so much it's gonna screw up the threads for the lug nut studs. So let's hope. Don't get your hand in here, have it back here.
There it goes.
Is it moving?
I saw it. I saw it.
Oh, there is movement.
Yes.
There's movement.
Yes. Yeehaw.
All right, it worked. Nice. Okay.
There it is. No.
No,
No, I did not.
this is water.
Yeah, this is the water intrusion that the
Yeah, so-
ESB talks about.
So yeah, this is very thin. It's not equal to the viscosity of gear oil. It's really thin. It's probably just rust and water, huh?
Look how rusted the...
Yeah, that thing is like totally rusted. So what I like using as a stand for the axle is I put it right onto the rotor. This way the studs aren't just digging into my workbench. Okay, let's take a closer look at this. So you can see a shiny mark on this inner retainer, and that's where the seal was riding. That's a witness mark. So we could clearly see that it was riding right in the middle of the retainer, which is nice. And I could feel a groove. And this might be hard to believe, but the rubber seal over time could actually create a divot in the metal from riding on it for thousands and thousands of miles. So this is one of the reasons why you would not want to reuse this retainer, even though you could pull it off clean. Because of that groove, that's one reason why you wouldn't want to reuse it, because if the seal ends up riding in that same spot, you could potentially get a leak because now there's less of a diameter there because of the metal that's been worn away. Another reason is when we pull these parts off, there's going to be striations and metal loss on the inside diameter. So some of the metal of the retainer gets lost in the removal of the retainer and ABS tone ring off the axle. So that's another reason why you don't want to reuse it, because gear oil could get past this area in two ways. It could get past the seal connection with the retainer, but it could also get past the retainer connection to the axle. This is a metal to metal seal, and this is a metal to rubber seal. So gear oil could get past in both areas. So you don't want to reuse these. Now comes the time where we start using some of Dwayne's special axle tools. This one we're going to use to get underneath the ABS tone ring to where we can hook up the main puller body and draw off the ABS tone ring and the inner retainer. This is kind of a learning process. I've never done one on a Sequoia. It's different than a 3rd generation 4Runner. It's different than a 5th gen 4Runner. It's different than a Tundra. It's a little bit unique because there's not much room between the ABS tone ring and the retainer. Instead of just trying to guess how many studs I need to knock out to fit this tool in, I'm just gonna knock them all out. I've got my axle nuts that affix the axle to the axle housing. I'm gonna screw them on to where they're level with the end of the stud. And they're a little bit sticky, so I'm gonna have to get them on the rest of the way with my wrench. I'm doing this to protect the threads, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to smack these with a brass hammer and knock the studs through the backing plate. So it's just a little bit of extra insurance that I don't mess up the threads. Okay, they're all looking pretty good. All right, I'm going to start hammering these suckers through. Now I'm just going to take the nuts off. So the brake dust shield is now free of the wheel bearing. We got all 4 studs here. They're all the same length. So now with Dwayne's special tool, you can see that it will slide in right underneath the ABS tone ring perfectly. So now we got to get the other piece of the tool and slide it over and hook it up. This big blue made in the USA bad boy right here. And then we got to get some washers and nuts on there. We only have 3 of those. I want to cinch this thing up to where the axle is fairly centered in the hole of this tool. So I'm just going to be kind of tightening them down and see if I can get it centered nice, because if I tighten one side down too much, then the tool isn't going to be centered on the axle. Okay, that looks good. We're going to bring this over to the press. So we're going to get the axle into the press. Hopefully the footage is going to look good, but we don't have a third person help us film, and we need 2 people to effectively get the press cross member in place. You could do it with 1 person, but it's just way more labor intensive. So here we go. So we're gonna set the axle under the cross member, and then as a team, we're gonna pull the pins and we're gonna lower the assembly down. Let's go to this one right here. I'll pull it up, and then we're going to capture the tool with these plates. Technically, you could just use Dwayne's tool like this, but there have been situations where the amount of force necessary to press the parts off is so much that it ends up bending the plate. So Dwayne recommends that you always support his tool with some thicker press plates. You can see that we have the screw bar on the 20-ton bottle jack extended, and I'm going to want to screw that in a little bit to where we have enough room to get our plates in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull down on this, and then Buddy is going to screw it in for me. So we got both of our plates. I'm going to pull it up, and then Buddy's going to slide them in for me. So you can see now Dwayne's tool is way more supported because it's not spanning as far of a gap between the cross member. It's being supported way further in towards the spine of the tool, which is what you want. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to center the axle shaft underneath the appendage right here. That looks like it's fairly centered. So now I'm just going to get my finger in here to work the lever and bring the press appendage down and meet up with the axle. It's not as lined up as I want. I'm going to back it off a little bit. That's looking better. Okay, so if it works out like we are hoping it works out, as we drive down with the press, the special adapter that's underneath the ABS tone ring and the inner retainer, it's going to start drawing that off of the axle. Here we go. That loud pop you heard was the ABS tone ring and inner retainer breaking free of the axle. Okay, you saw the axle drop out. So now as a team, we're going to raise the whole assembly up. And then I can pull the axle out. So we're going to disconnect the main tool from the special adapter. And then you can see we have the ABS tone ring and the inner retainer. Next, I'm going to get a C-clip out that retains the outer retainer and the bearing on the axle. So I'm coming in with my snap ring pliers. I'm going to expand this and get it out. There it is. Now we have to get this tool back over and connected with the axle studs. So I have to now draw the axle studs back in so I can attach this tool. Put the nut on there to hold it to where it doesn't fall out on me. I'm gonna get the other one started. Okay, they're all in there, and now I have to draw them up and get them locked back in. The knurls on some of them will lock into this bearing housing, so that's what I'm going to do next. A few of these nuts were kind of sticky on the threads of the stud, so what we did as a team is Buddy got underneath here and grabbed the head of the stud and held it while I got onto it with my impact gun. As soon as the knurls start capturing the bearing housing, then you don't have to hold it anymore and you could suck them fully in to the bearing housing. These right here are sucking into the upper post that the brake shoes rest against. And so there's a little bit more meat here than for the other two bolts that don't go through this piece right here. These studs aren't going to stick up as high as the other two studs because they first have to go through this piece of the parking brake system. Now I'm just taking a look and seeing that they're all sucked up. There's no gap. Okay, they look good. Now that the studs are all captured again, I'm going to take off these nuts. So now we're going to slide in position Dwayne's universal adapter. And then we got to get the nuts back on here. I'm not going to use a washer because I want maximum thread engagement. And with these two shorter ones, you can see that if I put a washer in there, I'm not going to get all the threads engaged with the nut, and then that's not necessarily a great thing. So I'm going to leave the washer out. Okay, those are all cinched down. Now we can get the main tool slid over, and then we get our washers and our nuts and affix this to the special adapter plate. So now we're going to bring this over to the press, and we're going to press the axle shaft out of the bearing. So same thing, we're going to get the axle underneath the cross member, and then we're going to bring the cross member down to meet up with it. So we have the axle underneath the cross member. Now we're going to bring the cross member down. And then we'll pull this thing up. And then now we're just going to apply pressure and start driving the axle through the bearing. Before you start using the press, just do a sanity check and think to yourself, did I get that snap ring out before I start doing this? Because it's happened before. People are just in a hurry to get the job done, or they just got sidetracked by something. They forgot to remove the snap ring. They start loading up this press like crazy, wondering what's wrong. And it's because they didn't remove the snap ring. Take a second look and just make sure you did remove that snap ring. So Buddy and I both know I removed the snap ring, so here we go. Oh, this is loading up like crazy. Wow, that was a lot of force. Loading up again. Is it moving?
Yeah, it's moving.
Okay. I think the bearing just broke.
The bearing just broke.
There it is. As you saw, that explosion of it initially breaking free was a lot of pressure. I've been doing press work with this Harbor Freight press for quite a while, and I know when it's taking a lot of force, and that press loaded up, and loaded up a huge amount, and then finally broke the axle free of the bearing. Just know that you're going to get some fireworks when you do this, and don't get scared. If you get scared, have somebody give you a hug. Okay, so we're going to lift this thing up together as a team. Okay, I'm going to support this. Can you get those plates out of the way? That's right. And we have our axle shaft. I could see one of the inner races is still stuck on there. Same thing happened when we did this on a 5th generation 4Runner. I took the nuts and washers off of the studs here so I can free the main tool. And then I'm gonna zip off these 17mm nuts and free the universal adapter. These I can't get onto with the socket because it's too close to here. So I'm just gonna have to use my crescent wrench. So universal adapter. You're going to notice we have the outer retainer, and it's only got a bevel on one side. It's flat on one side and beveled on the other side. And then you have this special washer. This washer is made in such a way where one side is concave and one side is convex. I don't know if you could see that in the video, but the side that faces the bearing is concave, and then it protrudes upward. It's convex on the top. So the concave side faces the bearing. So you have to remember that. And I could see you reusing this. I don't see any problem with it, but I think Buddy got a new one, right? So Buddy got a new one, so we're going to replace it. But you just have to remember the proper orientation, like I mentioned. I'm getting the 17mm nuts back onto the studs so I can free the bearing from the backing plate. The knurls of the studs is what's holding it in position. So I'm going to knock them back out. And I'm supporting this on a plastic 2x4. It's a little sticky on this one. There we go. The bearing is free of the backing plate. Now we're going to move on to getting the leftover bearing race that's stuck to the axle shaft off. Dwayne's special tool should be able to slide in underneath the race. There's a dust shield right here that I'm going to knock down with a hammer and a punch. And then now that leaves room to come in with the special tool, the same tool that we got under the ABS tone ring, to come in here and capture it. Just like that. We have the main tool hooked up to the special adapter. And again, when you're getting this on there, always take a look to how the axle shaft is in relation to the tool. So you want it pretty centered. If you tighten down one side more than the other, then it's going to be cocked in the tool. So it's better to have it in good alignment with the tool. So now we're going to carry this back over to the press. We're back over to the press, and we've got the axle in between the cross member. We're going to lower the cross member to the tool. I think this one will probably be good. Yeah, we might need to go down one more. I think we're going to have to go down one more. Let's just keep it right there and just lower it down one more. Okay, find the hole. Find the hole, Tim.
Find the hole, Tim.
There it is. Okay, now let's get these plates. You're going to slide them in. All right, we have the axle and special tool assembly captured by the plates. I'm going to pull down on the bottle jack, and he's going to screw the jack end out. I'm going to use my finger to bring the press appendage down to the axle. Center it. Sometimes the race could be really stuck on there, but from my experience from doing this on a 5th generation 4Runner, it didn't take much force at all to start removing the retainer. But if the press really loads up a lot, I might stop and then apply some heat to the bearing race to expand it a little bit to help with the removal. But let's see how it goes. Easy.
Easy peasy.
It didn't take much pressure at all. And there it is. It's off.
Woo.
All right, as a team, we're going to lift up the cross member. I'm going to hold the tool and you get the press plates out. Okay, I'm going to separate the main tool from the adapter. And here's that inner race that we just pulled off. And you might just want to keep this as part of your press tool repertoire, because you never know, you might be able to use this for something. With press work, you're only limited by your imagination of how to get things done. So I don't usually throw parts away like this. I save them because I might be able to find a use for it in the future. So now with the bearing race out of the way, I'm going to remove these dust shield things. So here's one piece, and then there's another one in here that's a little bit harder to remove. There we go. And here's the other piece. So this thing's looking pretty dirty, So I think we're going to spend a little time in here with some brake cleaner, some brushes, and some rags, and we're going to clean this thing up a little bit. All right, this concludes part 1. Join us in part 2, where we get all the new parts pressed onto the axle. We get the axle back onto the vehicle, the parking brake all put back together, the disc brakes put back together, and be done with this job. We'll see you there.